So 7 months ago, and I've mentioned this video a couple times, I did a video called We Have No King But Caesar. And I said that I was amazed to be seeing at that time moves towards reconciliation without actual resolution of differences over the gospel among people in three camps. Those who believe justification by faith but sanctification by works. Those who believe justification by works. And those who believe that justification is by faith, but faith means a backloaded thing, which is actually works. Okay, and what the three of them have in common is works, but they should be diametrically opposed. And what I saw was people who believe that justification by faith, but were not clear about sanctification, and were basically kind of living under the law and trying to be humble and trying to be loving and trying to clean the outside of the cup as best as they could without knowing how to identify with the crucified Christ. They were making overtures to, well, they were starting to backload works more and more, and then they were making overtures to people who denied the gospel. I mean, flat out enemies of the gospel. And it was really surreal. And they moved out of offense. And what I said was, there were lots of different groups of people who were intervolved with Jesus. There were people who believed on him and threw palms down in front of him because of the resurrection of Lazarus. There were Pharisees who wanted to kill him, and Sadducees who disagreed with them, and zealots, Greek proselytes, and they were all in division about him. But when it came down to give us Barabbas or give us Jesus, they all in one accord said, give us Barabbas, crucify Jesus. And when Pontius Pilate said, well, this is your king, they said, we have no king but Caesar. Which again means they all betrayed everything they supposedly stood for in a unified cry of offense against the truth, and received Barabbas instead of Jesus, and said, his blood be on our heads. We're so offended at Jesus that we would rather see him crucified and lose our kingdom. We have no king but Caesar. And it just exposed that their entire Jewish life was a sham. The ones that were following Jesus because he raised Lazarus from the dead were saying, crucify him. Everybody was saying crucify him. It's amazing. All those different groups were reconciled in that moment. And it looks like unity. And I just kind of anticipated that because I know how it works. I know what's going on in the world system. I know what's going on in Christendom with the moves to reconcile Rome with the Lutherans and the Calvinists and the Charismatics, and they're all going back home to Rome because they're tired of the bickering, they're tired of the fighting, they're tired of the contendering. That's what they think. But when it gets down to it, their problem is that they are not clear on the gospel. They are not clear on the truth, and they're not walking in the Spirit of Christ. And if you're not working in the Spirit of Christ, you are walking in the spirit of this age, even if you're Christian, because you're in the flesh. And when you are trying to shape your virtues to appear more loving, or even try to be more loving, or more humble, or more forgiving, rather than reckoning yourself dead with Christ and standing in the truth, no matter how it makes you look, you are going to get swept up in this unity that's coming. And I've been talking about it for quite a while. And the enemy has been working very systematically to soften the ground for that unity to happen. And I said, we're going to see a reconciliation between people who should be enemies for the gospel's sake. And tonight, I just happened to stumble across a channel. I was like, oh, what's this? I haven't seen this in a while. And I saw someone apologizing, which was right. They were apologizing for personal offenses to a number of people, but they were not changing the fact that they are deniers of the gospel and enemies of the truth. And I saw people who should not be engaging with this person accepting the apology and making peace. So it was just kind of shocking who I saw and what was going on. And this is what we're seeing. And the cry for unity is going to get louder. But, you know, Roman Catholicism means the Catholic. It's a unified church. It's the universal. Catholicism means universal, or one. Their whole thing is unity. And that's the cry of this spirit which animates Rome. It is the drunken whore. It's a spirit. And she has the wine of her fornication. And if you drink it, you will be numb and your conscience will become dull and you won't be able to discern and you'll have a problem with your spirit. It's a mess. It really blinds you. And I know that from personal experience because I was in a church where I finally put down my arms and said, I'm done fighting. I don't care anymore. I don't want to be that person anymore. And so I was like, I'm just going to be friendly and nice and tolerate people. And they loved me there. And I signed their membership thing knowing that I was lying, knowing that I was going against my conscience and what I believed was true. And I quenched the spirit. And I backslid more horribly than I ever have in my Christian life as a result of that. I completely backslid, this is 6-7 years ago, in such a shameful way that there's not a day that goes by that I don't regret it. And I'm ashamed. Even though my conscience is cleansed, it's like a permanent thing of fear in me where it's like, I never want to go back to that. And I can't keep myself. Only the Lord can keep me. But I know this, I have to keep a good conscience before the Lord. And so that's one of the reasons I will not back down on truth. Because it's not about me arguing with you. It is about me staying with what is true. And that is my obedience to the Lord. You know, true humility is to tremble at the word. True humility is to have a good conscience before the Lord. True meekness is to submit to the Lord and His word and be willing to be at odds with everybody, if that's what it means, in order to keep a good conscience before the Lord and not compromise on truth. And we are called to walk according to the light we have. A lot of people say, well, you just know so much Bible that you're puffed up. You are arguing about everything. No, I'm not arguing about everything. I'm contending only for one thing, which is the gospel that Christ is our righteousness, sanctification, and redemption, and for people's conscience to be free from bondage in those three areas so that they can walk in a manner worthy of the Lord and be free of bondage. And I'm doing it not just for their sake, but for my own. I am not letting anyone steal my crown. I am holding fast to my crown. I'm fighting my own fight of faith and working out my own salvation with fear and trembling. And this is how I do it. I teach what I am absolutely convinced from the Word is true, and I will not move away from it. Not because I'm proud, not because I want to be right, but because I can't afford to do otherwise. If I compromise, I'm so weak that I will backslide. So I am held in the Lord's mercy. I am standing in His grace. And it is through belief in the truth, and it is my sanctification is through belief in the truth. I cannot compromise on truth. And this is really critical. We have false ideas of what love means, what forgiveness looks like, what humility is, and it's from our postmodern culture. Our postmodern culture doesn't produce men and women of God. It produces people who think that to say that you are absolutely convinced that something is true to the point where you'd stake your life on it is pride. That's just pride. Postmodernism says there is your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. Nobody knows everything, therefore we can't stand for certain on anything. And in the emergent church, it's really bad. They teach that humility means I may not know. I may not know. Well, I'm firmly persuaded. Okay? I'm firmly persuaded. And unless you can take me to the scriptures and show me where what I believe is an error, then I'm going to stand with what I believe, because that is a matter of my conscience. And it's the only way I can enjoy and stay in my freedom in Christ and keep the flow of the Spirit. And I already know what happens if I compromise on that. You fall backwards. It's really true. You're shrinking back. When you compromise on truth, you damage your conscience. And when you damage your conscience, you damage the bridge from your spirit to your soul. And now your soul, your mind is not being renewed. And what happens is your understanding darkens and you're walking in the futility of your mind, alienated from the sense of the life of God in you. And then you're beyond feeling, and you will go after something with greed. You may go after sin in an outward way, which is what happened to me, or you may go after the dopamine feeling that comes from the sensual gratification of feeling loved and feeling loving, which means I just forgive everybody, and I'm going to be at peace with everyone, and this is just going to be beautiful, and I'm going to stop contending for the truth because that's ugly, and I don't want to be that person anymore because it didn't feel good. And what happens is that produces a lukewarm mixture. You are drinking Jezebel's drink. That is the wine of her fornication. That's one aspect of it. There's many different aspects of it, but that is the aspect that produces the cup called Laodicea, a lukewarm drink, where you can't be cold and you can't be hot. Okay? And it blinds you. They thought they were rich, but they were poor. He said, you're blind, miserable, poor, wretched, naked. And as believers, we are regenerated. But we can lose our sensitivity to our spirit and our fellowship with the Lord, to the point where Jesus is knocking on the door saying, if any man opens to me, I will come into him and dine with him. And right now you can either be in Jezebel's lukewarm drink and drunk with it, or you can be in the feast at the table with the Lord. And the feast is the word of truth. And there's no middle ground. Now, we're not all accountable to know everything, but we are accountable to obey our conscience and walk according to the light we have. And to whom much is given, much is required. So I'm required, and it is true. If I don't keep a good conscience and contend for the things that I know are true, and yes, he's given me a lot to contend for because I read too much. That means I'm that much more responsible to contend for the truth in the areas that he has revealed to me, revealed the truth to me. I have to walk according to the light I have. That does not mean you're responsible for everything that I'm responsible for. You walk according to the light you have, but you better keep a good conscience, and you better not compromise, because if you do, you will be lulled asleep. And remember, Thessalonians talks about watching. And we who are of the day, the day of the Lord should not come upon us as a thief, because we're of the day, and we are not of the night. We are not drunk, and we're not asleep. You know what puts you to sleep and makes you drunk? Lukewarm compromise. And that's what's going to happen. And it's going to come together, and it's going to be an angry mob of people who are saying enough is enough, from all different camps. And they're going to think they've discovered something beautiful with this new unity and reconciliation across the aisles and everything. And yet, it'll be a false reconciliation, because none of the fundamentals will have changed. They won't actually be walking in agreement. They will all be searing their conscience and no longer walking according to their convictions, but rather walking in a so-called harmony with each other. That's a spirit. And it's going to be a persecution. And many of them are believers, but they don't know how to walk in the Spirit. They don't know how to crucify the flesh. And they don't know the difference between fallen human virtues and the Spirit of God. And human love and human humility and human meekness generated from the flesh, and submission to the Word in faith, which produces the real fruit of the Spirit that is not necessarily as visible and as attractive as you think. Yes, I have joy in my heart, and so did Jesus, and so did Paul. But when it was time to fight, they fought. They did not compromise. It was love with righteousness, not unrighteous love. It was speaking the truth in love, not loving with each other at the expense of the truth. And it all comes down to the conscience. I've been talking about the perfecting of the conscience, which is necessary to walk in the Spirit and to really experience the life of Christ, and to be watchful and to abide in Him. And there's going to be a distinction. I'm warning my subs to watch out for this unity that's coming. I've been warning about it for quite a while, but it's picking up steam. And this whole thing, got elevated. And on the one hand, the truth shined, and quite a few people came out and were like, yeah, okay, I want to follow the way of truth. Okay, but be prepared to be at odds with everybody. You're not gonna be able to help it. And that doesn't mean you're looking for fights, but you're gonna find that you can't compromise. If you want to know the Lord and really know the taste of the good land and really enjoy the supper, enjoy the feast, you have to be willing to be hot or cold and open to Him, and have a good conscience, and not get swallowed up in this lukewarm flow that's going to be spewed out of the mouth of the Lord eventually. Now, those who are asleep, if they're regenerated, will be raptured just as we will if we're watching. But we want to be found confident and rejoicing at His coming, and free from offense, filled with the fruits of righteousness which are by Jesus Christ, to the praise and glory of God. And that comes from seeking the glory of God only, and not the glory that comes from men. And it means coming out of the camp where Jesus suffered for us outside the gate to sanctify us in His own blood. We go outside the camp bearing His reproach. So be it. That's what it's going to take to be awake and sanctified spirit, soul, and body. And it's not a work. It's not a work. It is holding fast to your crown and not letting anyone take you off as spoil, and not letting and it's abiding in the vine and not being withered and carried off by men and burned by them. We don't want that. We want to keep our freedom in Christ, even if it means we have to contend and fight. Okay? It's really critical that we keep a good conscience so that we can keep the sensitivity to Christ, because we're going to really need his comfort, because they ain't going to like us. Okay? At this point, I'm too far in to back down. I'd get swallowed up. Once you get into the good land, there's enemies in the land that have to be taken, or you will get swallowed up. So you have to have your armor on. On the one hand, you're entering into rest, but on the other hand, you are an army, because you're going into land that was populated by the Canaanites before you got there. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. Talk to you later.